I let go of my mop and walked straight to the front of the high-stakes board meeting. Every arrogant executive, every manager, everyone stared in stunned silence as I unpinned the cheap name tag from my gray uniform, the fake name Ryan, and set it on the expensive mahogany table. I stood tall, looking at them with a calm they had never seen before. The kind of peace you have when you have nothing left to prove. "My name is Harrison Blake," I said. "I own this company." Nobody moved. They froze because just days ago, they treated me like trash while I swept their floors. I had built Blake Horizon from scratch, turning a single freight contract into one of the biggest logistics networks on the East Coast. I did it by working longer hours than anyone, never acting superior. By making the hard calls and trusting the corporate ladder I spent 20 years putting together. The business ran, the profits climbed. Every paper report looked perfect. Yet, behind the shiny charts, I felt like we were losing our humanity, our respect for people. I lived alone in a 32nd floor corner penthouse, barely 12 minutes away from my corporate office. After my divorce. It wasn't a home, just a quiet place to store my expensive suits and deal with my insomnia. My career quickly filled the void left behind by my family. And for a long time, my prestigious title felt like enough. But recently, reading reports that felt totally fake, I started to wake up. I wondered what exactly I was protecting if we treated our workers like garbage. Glossy reports claimed our workplace culture ranked in the top 10% of the industry. Our employee satisfaction supposedly beat every benchmark. Newsletters showed smiling managers holding awards, pretending they cared about the people under them. The graphs were perfect and every single metric pointed straight up. But I read those summaries knowing a spreadsheet can't measure how you actually treat people. I saw words but no heart. Then a mysterious letter arrived. It was printed out and slipped directly onto my desk, completely bypassing the corporate gatekeepers. The sender had been incredibly careful. It described a toxic culture where real hard work was ignored unless you kissed the right boss's feet, where managers rewarded personal loyalty while treating everyone beneath them like garbage, and where honest workers who dared to speak up were ruthlessly cast aside. It exposed a company that looked flawless on paper but was rotten and cruel to its core. I read it twice, then looked at my pristine fake culture reports. The gap between executive lies and the harsh reality was sickening to me. I didn't call an emergency board meeting. I didn't forward it to human resources. Instead, I quietly slipped down to the facility's basement office. At 6:30 in the morning, before any high and mighty executives arrived, to speak with the maintenance supervisor. A quiet man named Gerald. He had faithfully served in this building for 11 years. Gerald stared at me, unused to powerful people ever treating him with any real dignity or respect. But I explained what I needed. Seeing my sincerity, he finally agreed to help me. By 7:15, my executive title was gone, replaced by a gray janitor uniform, a fake name tag reading Ryan Cole, and a 5-day schedule sweeping floors 3 through 7. I lied to my assistant, saying I was traveling for business. I forwarded my calls and left my luxury watch behind. I kept only one tool, a slim encrypted tablet hidden at the bottom of my janitor cart. It looked like cheap facilities inventory, but it carried my full executive credentials. I knew I would need it eventually, though I wasn't sure when. The first morning undercover was disorienting in ways I never expected. Not because sweeping floors was hard. The physical labor was repetitive and invisible, but completely manageable. No, it was my sudden, complete insignificance. For 20 years, my title made me the center of attention in every single room. Now, pushing a heavy cart past my own boardroom, not a single employee even bothered to look up. I was mere furniture. Just background noise. Like the hum of the vents, there, doing my job and completely beneath their notice. By day 2, the shock wore off. I began watching how they treated the powerless. How people behave when they think. Nobody of status is watching reveals their true character better than any corporate report. I watched a manager brutally bark at a junior coordinator just for asking a question, then instantly put on a warm, fake smile when an executive walked past. I watched 2 workers in the break room tear down a colleague's hard work with cruel, surgical precision, then fake absolute joy the moment that same man walked into the room. I heard how people spoke when they believed no bosses were around to judge. crueler, mockingly, and brutally honest. But during those first 2 days, I never ran into Evelyn Carter. I only heard her name once, whispered by an employee mocking her for working until 10 the night before. She was wrapping up the strategy plan for our interns. They weren't praising her. They sounded cynical, as if hard work was a threat, like her dedication was some desperate cry for approval instead of genuine professional pride. I finally saw her face on the third morning of my shift. She stood by the fifth-floor copier, quietly waiting for her prints while holding a warm coffee mug with both hands. It's how you cling to warmth when the corporate environment around you is freezing. She was younger than I expected, probably only in her mid-20s. She dressed simply, carrying herself with the careful modesty of someone used to being ignored by elites. When the machine jammed, she didn't demand help, she just knelt down to fix it herself. She worked patiently, without any irritation. She found the crumpled page, cleared it, and stood up. She caught me watching her, and she smiled. It wasn't a fake transactional grin meant to please a boss, but a genuine kind gesture to a simple janitor. "That machine jams at least twice a day," she said. "I think it's protesting something." Her humor made me laugh instantly. I couldn't remember the last time an employee made me laugh without trying to flatter my title. I grew to understand her daily rhythm. The way you notice anyone's routine when you actually respect them. Not by their rank, but by their daily decencies. Evelyn always arrived first and left last. I knew she usually ate lunch at her desk because I cleared the empty break rooms every single afternoon. Her desk was always packed while the other interns bailed early. She did not wear headphones, unlike the rest of the interns. A dense notepad sat right beside her. Her notebook was filled with tiny, meticulous handwriting that looked less like messy notes and more like blueprint architecture. But more importantly, she noticed things others completely ignored. Twice that week she spoke directly to me. It was not mindless small talk. She asked because she actually cared. She wanted to know if I had eaten or taken a break. The first time she asked, I did not know how to respond. I was so unused to being seen that I just stood there frozen for a second. She did not make it weird. She just smiled and moved on like truly decent people do. A real test of character happened on Thursday afternoon with 2 other interns. They were the type of arrogant young guys who strutted around like they owned my company. They were bragging about a major strategy project right by the elevators. I was mopping nearby, completely invisible to them. One was named Caleb Foster. I had already clocked Caleb. You noticed him the way you notice a storm. He commanded every room, making everything about himself without seeming to try at all. He was smooth, sharp, and well-dressed. He spoke to my executive managers with a comfortable, easy confidence. Maybe it was real, or maybe he just rehearsed how powerful men act. Either way, it worked. I watched 3 of my own directors light up around him over 3 days. Now Caleb was casually boasting that the entire logistics restructuring proposal was his doing. The very project that was getting heavy praise on our internal channels. He claimed he solved it by rethinking the routing intervals himself. He told the story entirely in the first person. He said the word "my" 4 times in 60 seconds. The other intern just nodded, and neither bothered to look at me. I just kept pushing my mop and stayed quiet. But I remembered what the floor manager quietly told me on my second day. He mentioned that Evelyn had been working on this alone. She built the framework 2 weeks before the project even launched. I found her later in the small 5th-floor conference room where interns escaped when the main office got too noisy. She was completely alone, just like she always was late at night. She was grinding through spreadsheets with a quiet dignity that made her look like the real boss. Most of the floor was deserted. The overhead lights had already dimmed to their late-night settings. Her only company was the glow of her screen and a desk lamp she had dragged over from the corner. I was emptying the recycling bins nearby when she looked up and saw me. She closed her screen without making a big deal out of it. She was not hiding anything, just giving a janitor her full attention. "Still here," she said. "Still here," I replied. There was an easy, respectful vibe between us that I could not fully explain. Maybe it was the late hour, when titles fade away and only real character remains. Quieter, more honest, stripped of all that daytime corporate performance. Or maybe Evelyn just didn't measure a person's worth by their title before deciding to be kind. She spoke to me, a janitor, exactly like an equal. It should be a basic human standard. You and I know how rare that basic respect is in corporate offices. Without a single complaint, she simply noted that they moved the deadline up. She explained how she had been quietly refining the routing interval model because the original data had a major flaw in how it tracked peak hour variance. No bragging, no trying to sell herself to me. She just outlined the problem and how she was fixing it. I listened, suddenly seeing the truth with absolute, undeniable clarity. I was looking at the most talented mind in the entire intern group, hidden in plain sight. And I knew my managers would never notice her because they only value big titles. I gently asked her if the rest of the team had helped with this routing model. She gave me a look. The kind of look that hits just before the words, telling you she knew exactly what I was actually asking. We all contribute. She spoke with the quiet weariness of someone who knows honesty is rarely rewarded in a place like this. I nodded, finished gathering the recycling bins, and rolled my heavy cart toward the exit. At the door, I paused to tell her, simply and sincerely, that her work was truly outstanding. She looked startled, but not exactly flattered. Just disarmed, the way we get when someone speaks a rare truth directly to us. She thanked me. I walked away, pushing my cart down the quiet hall, wondering how the company I built had become so blind to real human value. By Wednesday night, it was time for our quarterly staff mixer. Nothing formal, of course. Just one of those artificial corporate events meant to show we care, while secretly reinforcing the office hierarchy, where the social climbers make sure they are seen with the right elites. We gathered on the 6th floor, a fancy lounge space filled with much better furniture than the rest of the office. I was assigned to patrol the outer edges, clearing away dirty glasses, wiping down counters and hauling ice to keep the bar running smoothly. I knew it would feel awkward, but the reality was far worse. Caleb and his little clique staked out their ground right in the center of the room, the exact spot where they could grab the most attention from passing executives. Within 20 minutes, Caleb had reeled in 2 directors and a vice president, putting on a loud show of collaboration that was pure performance. I crept along the walls, silently collecting their trash. Isn't it funny how much people reveal when they think you're completely beneath their notice? But earlier that night, right before the party got going, I was mopping outside the executive boardroom just as the interns finished up their project presentation. I could hear their loud chatter even through the thick wood. That fake, calculated energy people use when they desperately need the bosses to see them as a rising corporate star. Caleb strutted out first, talking loudly to impress the director of operations, a sharp guy named Patrick Sell who wore his power easily and his biases openly. I immediately recognized Evelyn's routing interval concept coming out of Caleb's mouth. She had explained it to me just 2 nights ago, yet he acted like he invented it. Not stolen exactly, just absorbed and repackaged in his vocabulary. He presented it so naturally that even I, knowing the truth, was stunned. Would have struggled to pinpoint the exact moment he stole her hard work. Evelyn came out near the back of the group, quiet beside another intern. I watched her face closely as Caleb bragged to Patrick about his ideas. She didn't show any anger, just a quiet, heavy stillness in her eyes. She had clearly done the math on this place, realizing the system was unfair but no longer surprising. She had been through this before. She knew the ending, so she just kept moving. Now at the mixer, this ugly dynamic played out louder and for a bigger audience. Caleb made sure he was standing right in the center of the spotlight. I quietly worked the room's perimeter and watched them with the sharp focus of a man done being shocked, now just keeping score. Eventually, I found myself refilling the ice bucket at the bar station. Caleb and his little crowd started heading my way. Their chatter grew louder and more casual, the typical smug tone of people who feel untouchable. One of the eager interns made a loud joke about a trash bag sitting right by the service door. Caleb smirked in my direction, his posture instantly shifting. He puffed himself up, the classic move of a bully who spots an easy target. He spoke up loudly, making sure to say, at least the janitor knew what he was actually qualified to do. The crowd chuckled. The directors gave those weak, spineless smiles, the kind people use when they lack the decency to stand up for someone. I calmly set the ice down and stayed silent. I had run enough boardrooms to know he wanted a reaction. I refused to give him that power. Keeping my expression completely blank, I quietly moved on to the next table. Then someone, whether it was Caleb himself or one of his followers, I couldn't be sure, purposely knocked a half-full glass of red wine my way as I reached to clean the table. The glass shattered on the floor, splashing dark red wine right across my shoes. And the crowd erupted in that nasty laughter that pretends to be an accident. One guy pointed at the mess and smirked, telling me I had a job to do, as if I hadn't noticed. Meanwhile, Evelyn had been watching from across the room. I had barely even noticed her there during the mixer. She had kept to the edges, staying near the quieter, humbler groups. The humble way she navigated a corporate culture that clearly didn't deserve her yet. But she was paying attention, and she stepped in before I could even grab my mop. She immediately knelt and started picking up the broken glass. Using a simple napkin, she did what she could to clean my mess. Then she stood up, looking those entitled snobs straight in the eye. Her voice wasn't loud. True authority doesn't need to shout. She told them she didn't see the joke, adding that no matter what fancy title you hold in this company, no one has the right to treat another human being like garbage for cheap laughs. She spoke with the quiet conviction of someone who measures people by their character, not their rank on an org chart. But she stood her ground with the quiet strength of someone who knows some principles are worth any cost. The smug laughter around Caleb's little circle slowly faded away. Unable to meet her eyes, one director stared down. Caleb's expression twisted in momentary shock before hardening once more. He put on a blank mask, shutting her out like a door quietly closing. A heavy silence filled the room. Evelyn handed him the napkin, looking at him with pure respect, not a shred of pity. It was a simple recognition of shared humanity before she quietly stepped back to her spot. The Undercover owner finished mopping up. The party went on, but her courage had shifted the room, and everyone nearby could feel it. For Harrison, a deeper realization began to stir, one he could not easily name. He had spent 20 years chasing prestige, trying to build an impressive name, wanting to command every room and force others to stand at attention. Somewhere in that climb, he had lost touch with basic human decency. He forgot what it felt like to be respected just because it was right. The young intern had stood up for a janitor, risking her career against powerful people. She did it without a second thought for her own career. She expected nothing in return, showing a rare grace he had forgotten existed. It was the rarest quality in this corporate tower. Then came Thursday morning. The blow was quiet, cold, and buried in administrative paperwork. The competitive interns were fighting for just 2 coveted full-time roles. The final shortlist had already been quietly vetted by senior management. Before reaching human resources, Evelyn's name was ruthlessly crossed off. Harrison learned about her exclusion the same way he observed everything that week. By being invisible, the kind of servant the powerful never bothered to quiet down for. He was sweeping the hallway right outside Patrick's office. He heard the cold discussion drifting through the cracked door. Patrick was talking with Carol, the head of human resources. Their voices carried the dull, robotic tone of corporate leaders quietly writing off a human life. Patrick admitted she had talent, but she lacked their preferred profile. She simply wasn't aligned with the aggressive, cold leadership style they valued in their managers. He dismissed her as a mere team player, not a driver. The human resources director gave a bored nod and quickly moved down the roster. As the door began to swing open, Harrison quietly stepped back into the shadows. Retreating to a quiet cleaning alcove on the 5th floor, he sat down to process his anger. Just a worker, not a ruthless climber. The ugly words stung his mind. In reality, it meant they punished true service and rewarded those who put on a ruthless corporate show. This was the empire he built. He had approved the guidelines and set the cold culture from his 32nd floor suite, and this toxic environment was the result. They had created a polite language of cruelty that masked the dismissal of good people. That evening, he sought out the records, driven by a deliberate desire for justice. He was no longer just watching, he was preparing. Their arrogance had turned his quiet investigation into a search for hard evidence. He reached into his trash bin and pulled out his secure master tablet. Logged in with my CEO credentials using a secure private connection. I searched the database and opened the intern project folder on our network drive. I wasn't acting as Ryan the janitor anymore. I was doing this as the CEO because true leaders protect their team from exploitation. But I was working from a cramped service alcove on the 5th floor, not my executive office on the 32nd. The digital version history on the strategy document showed me the truth in under 4 minutes. The first draft from 3 weeks back clearly showed Evelyn's initials in the file metadata. Yet the current file, handed up to the executive board for approval, had her name completely wiped out. They stripped the metadata to steal her work, but the revision history was still there. I could see exactly what they stole and when. The brilliant operations model she built was the target. The one Caleb claimed was his own genius and Patrick praised as rare talent had already existed in its perfect complete form in Evelyn's draft before Caleb ever spoke a word of it. My management team knew. Not officially, but they turned a blind eye. But I have run companies long enough to recognize the quiet complicity of leaders who actively choose to ignore injustice. They chose to ignore the weak. I locked the screen and slid it back into my janitor cart. The final internship presentations were scheduled for Friday morning. A massive boardroom audience, including senior directors and 2 vice presidents, and our operations chief, all gathered on the 8th floor to hand down judgment. The corporate game was simple. The interns would present their plan, then face questions from the bosses, and the board would use this to decide who gets hired and who gets discarded. Naturally, Caleb was named the lead presenter. This setup had been quietly arranged days ago. Patrick pushed for it, calling it a reward for Caleb's leadership when it was actually theft, while Evelyn, the actual creator, was relegated to clicking slides and fetching backup files like an assistant. She was allowed in the room, but forced to stay in the shadows. I discovered this on Thursday evening. It was our last quiet talk before I decided to step in. I found her in the small 5th floor meeting room, which had slowly become the only place in this building where an intern and a janitor could talk as equals. She wasn't working on the presentation. She had finished her job and surrendered it to the thieves. She sat there with a cold coffee, staring blankly into the distance, looking exactly like someone who has reached the end of their rope. She quietly told me she was quitting the moment the showcase ended, leaving the room and the company. She spoke with zero emotion. It's how you talk when the pain is gone and only reality is left. She said she was grateful, but she was tired of spending 2 months watching privileged people steal her creations while everyone cheered. And she knew staying wouldn't fix a broken culture that abuses the weak. She wasn't even angry anymore. And I believed her, because the total lack of anger wasn't her hiding it. It was pure defeat. I saw a deep exhaustion in her, the kind from being right about an unfair system for so long that proving it doesn't even feel like a victory anymore. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. She told me she was going to correct the record before leaving, but not in front of the board, knowing how they'd protect their own. Instead, she would submit the proof to HR right after the presentation. She'd already written the whole thing. She had preserved every file version, documenting the exact timeline of her work, and every meeting where they stole her ideas and presented them as their own. She knew it might not change a thing for her, but she refused to walk away without standing up for herself just once. I looked at her from across the small table. I weighed my next move, wondering if warning her beforehand was the right thing to do. I decided against it. Not to keep her in the dark, but because tomorrow required her natural, honest composure, the quiet dignity of someone expecting nothing from a broken system. I only told her that tomorrow would go very differently than she imagined. She stared at me with a heavy, tired skepticism. It was the look of someone who had heard empty promises too many times. I didn't say more. I just told her to be in that room tomorrow and stay there, no matter what. Something in my eyes didn't match the cheap gray uniform I wore. It didn't match the mop cart, the name tag, or my janitor title, making her nod slowly. She didn't ask questions. She just trusted me, and that was enough. I pushed my cleaning cart out, heading down the quiet hallway toward the elevator. The big presentation was set for 9 tomorrow morning. I had a few things to arrange first. By 8:40, Caleb Foster strutted in with the supreme confidence of a man whose high title made him believe he owned the room. He wore a flashy new jacket. He carried glossy, printed copies of his presentation slides, handing them to the assistants with the practiced charm of a man who rehearsed every single fake gesture. The massive 8th-floor boardroom slowly began to fill up. Directors took their places, executives shuffled papers, and the operations chief sat at the head of the table, wrapped in self-importance. The low-ranking interns lined up against the back wall. Evelyn sat at the very edge of the room, her laptop open. Her face was a mask of quiet dignity, holding her emotions perfectly in check. At 5 to 9, I slipped through the service door at the back. Still wearing my worn-out gray janitor uniform, I quietly parked my mop cart in the corner, blending into the background like I belonged there. Nobody spared a glance for the janitor. I stood by the wall and watched. Caleb started right at 9. I had to admit, the man was polished. I felt no bitterness in admitting it. It was just a fact. He knew exactly how to play the corporate game. He delivered the opening slides with easy charm, locking eyes with every executive at the table. The senior directors nodded, completely hooked. The big boss scribbled an approving note. It was a brilliant presentation, built entirely on the hard work of the quiet girl he treated like nothing. Caleb, despite his prestige, contributed just one real idea to the project. 8 minutes in, something happened that I honestly did not see coming. Evelyn raised her hand, not to disrupt, but with a quiet, steady resolve. It was the strength of someone who refused to stay silent any longer. Caleb froze mid-sentence, staring at her. The entire executive panel did too. She calmly, unapologetically explained she needed to flag a major issue before they went any further. She explained that the routing model they were presenting came from her draft written 3 weeks earlier, and she had the hard proof ready to hand over to HR and the panel directly. She knew this was an incredibly awkward moment, but she refused to sit silently in the back of the room, watching her hard work get stolen by a superior for the second time. The room went dead silent. Patrick Sell's face instantly tightened. Caleb stood at the podium, looking like a bully whose cheap tricks just failed publicly. I quietly set down the handle of my mop cart. I walked right to the front, stepping directly into the light of the projection screen. I unpinned the fake name tag that read Ryan Cole and tossed it onto the conference table. I did not raise my voice. Looking at the panel, people I had hired and trusted to protect our values, I told them my real name was Harrison Blake, and that I was the CEO of Blake Horizon Logistics. I told them they all deserved an explanation, starting with the theft we just witnessed. The silence that followed was that heavy, suffocating kind that happens when a room full of high-ranking professionals suddenly forgets how to act. Directors stared at each other. Patrick Sell had gone completely still. Caleb stood at the podium, his face cycling through a dozen different emotions before settling on a blank, empty stare. A careful blankness people reach for when they realize their titles can no longer hide their lies. I connected my encrypted tablet directly to the projection system. I spent all night compiling the proof I needed. Version histories, digital tracking, the original file with Evelyn's name deeply embedded in the metadata. The stripped, stolen document contrasted with a timeline of every single meeting where concepts from that original work were verbally presented by Caleb as his own, long before the other interns had even viewed the written framework. I flashed it all on the screen. I explained the evidence calmly, like any corporate audit, letting the cold facts expose exactly how they treated those they deemed insignificant. Then I displayed the cruel HR evaluation notes written by Patrick Sell, the dismissive phrase, "more of a contributor than a driver," and the recommendation to eliminate Evelyn from the associate shortlist. I read those words aloud, letting their sheer arrogance fill the room. I watched Patrick squirm as his private dismissal of a vulnerable worker was dragged into the harsh public light. I told them that this was not just about one privileged bully stealing credit from an intern. I told them our system was broken, designed to value corporate titles over human decency, making this behavior not just possible, but the guaranteed path to success. In my company, fancy titles got rewarded, while true leadership was completely ignored. Hardworking folks at the bottom were kept completely separated from real power. while corporate managers, obsessed with status, judged them without knowing their struggles. They treated human beings like machines, caring only about metrics on paper. I knew this because I spent a week watching them as a janitor, a position they deemed too low to hide their true colors. How they treated a lowly janitor revealed their true character. Our operations chief, Frank Greer, a decent man who'd served 9 years here, asked just one quiet question. He asked if my evidence of their abuse was complete. I told him it was. Frank nodded once and looked down at his notes in silence. In that moment, I knew the truth had finally broken through their corporate armor. We took a short recess, and the board members quietly filed out. Caleb Foster slipped out of the room in silence. I stood at the front of the empty boardroom, looking at Evelyn, who hadn't budged from her spot against the wall. She stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite figure out. It wasn't shock, there was a quiet, dignified strength in her eyes. It was the look of mad realization of a person who just understood that the conversation she thought we were having was actually a completely different story. She spoke my name, my real name, quietly, testing it against the janitor she thought she knew. I looked at her and apologized deeply. I didn't try to sugarcoat it or hide behind my executive title. I admitted that my company had failed a good person like her, and I had allowed that failure by letting my title isolate me from the real world. The cruelty she endured over the last 2 months was the result of a broken culture I had built and neglected to watch. I knew my words meant nothing without action, and I promised to prove my respect with real changes. I asked her if she would stay when the board returned and present her brilliant strategy exactly the way she had originally designed it. She stared at me for a long moment. She was exhausted from fighting this battle alone, but I could see a spark return to her eyes. It wasn't just relief. It was the quiet resolution of a brave woman realizing she no longer had to fight her battles alone against powerful bullies. She said yes. 20 minutes later, the board returned, suddenly paying very close attention. They finally looked like people humbled by the reminder that their titles came with actual responsibility to protect others. Frank Greer asked if there was anything else to show. I gestured to Evelyn. She stood up, completely bypassing the corporate podium. She walked straight to the front, standing tall right beside the screen. She had the quiet confidence of someone whose value came from her brilliant mind, not a fancy corporate title. She opened up her heavier, original work, starting right from the beginning, a problem she had solved 3 weeks before our highly paid executives even noticed. She masterfully walked the board through every detail of her model, explaining the huge mistakes she had caught in their accounting, and the brilliant fix she'd built, showing the massive operational savings her brilliant model generated. She didn't hide behind a title. She faced tough, pointed questions head-on, answering them directly without once checking notes. No corporate games, just raw capability. When she wrapped up, Frank Greer studied the operations data on her final slide, admitting that if these efficiency projections actually held up at scale, we would see a massive drop in our regional logistics costs. He asked how much she trusted her own model's assumptions. Instead of boasting, she pointed out the riskiest variables and where she would personally make more cautious, conservative adjustments. She offered him a realistic, honest range rather than corporate sugarcoating. Frank wrote it down and thanked her by name, true respect. This was the intimidating room elites claimed she wasn't ready for. The following weeks were incredibly tough, but I never expected them to be easy. 3 toxic managers, including Patrick, lost their high-paying titles not for drama, but through a meticulous review process I handled personally, with the quiet precision of someone who knows real accountability takes documentation, not cheap theater. Caleb Foster quit before my formal investigation could even reach him. Our team processed his exit that same week. I ordered an independent audit of our promotion and evaluation practices. No more useless self-reported surveys. Just a deep, forensic look at real promotions and evaluation language. We analyzed how our values actually affected regular employees, those working without powerful sponsors or elite connections to shield them. The cold, hard facts were ugly. I shared the raw truth with everyone, hosting open town halls on every single floor. Regular workers could confront me directly, without PR managers shielding the leadership. Some of those questions were incredibly blunt. They were sharp, direct, and deeply confrontational. A few quiet stories showed me this rot ran far deeper than I had ever realized. I gave honest answers and admitted what past wrongs I couldn't undo. Then I promised concrete steps to make things right. I didn't fake corporate contrition. I delivered straight facts and promises I fully meant to keep. That is the only real accountability I respect in others. Real systemic changes rolled out over the next few months. We built a new system based entirely on actual work. It tracked verifiable output, so manager biases couldn't bury a worker's efforts. We set up a diverse board. They flagged empty promotions given to favorites who lacked any real proven results. We scrapped the toxic anonymous suggestion box. We replaced it with a direct whistleblower channel, going straight to a board-level ombudsman instead of HR. HR had always protected the very executive layer they were supposed to police anyway. These weren't perfect solutions, and I knew that. But they were genuine steps to shift our actual culture, not just change the corporate slogans. And that honest difference was the only thing that mattered to me anymore. Evelyn accepted one of the associate roles. She officially joined us full-time just a month after her presentation. Frank Greer requested her personally, proving that real value outshines any fancy title. By the 4th month, she was leading her own small team of 4 analysts. Her project now covered 3 major regional logistics hubs. And she finally had a direct line to the executives using her data. Her team respected her for who she was. It was that genuine respect you give a leader who just lets you do your job. She still worked late sometimes, not to impress bosses with fancy titles, but simply because she was someone who always finished what she started. And this time, nobody in power questioned the true value of her dedication. I found myself back in the office late one Thursday evening. Not because I had nowhere else to go, though that was true for years, but because the work was there, and I still had not built the habit of leaving early. I was heading down the hall toward the exit on the 5th floor when I walked past that small conference room. The same room with the single desk lamp and cold coffee. A quiet sanctuary that, for me, used to be the only honest space here. The light was on. I stopped and looked through the glass door. Evelyn was inside, sitting across from one of her young analysts. The two of them were solving a problem together, their body language easy and collaborative. She was explaining a concept, and he was leaning forward in that eager way people do when someone actually takes the time to teach. She looked like a person who was finally allowed to fill the space she was always meant to occupy. I did not knock, I just watched for a second, then walked away. I was not wearing that cheap gray uniform. I was not pushing a mop cart or wearing a name tag with another man's name on it. I pressed the lobby button and stood in the elevator, hands deep in my pockets. I thought about the steep cost of this entire undercover journey. From that warning letter, to my janitor outfit, to the boardrooms, and finally rebuilding this broken culture. I asked myself if all of it was truly worth it. And the answer that came back to me was simple. The woman in that room had done her job with integrity and care, only to be treated for 2 months like her decency was some kind of weakness. The only reason we fixed this was because on a random Wednesday evening, at a dull office party, she chose to defend a humble janitor, risking her own job when she had absolutely nothing to gain. That was the true test. Not my financial audits, nor the restructuring or the legal reviews. Those were just tools. The truth is much simpler and more lasting. It is the quiet choice made by a person under no obligation, deciding that a powerless person's dignity was worth protecting. I rode the elevator down to a completely silent lobby. I stepped out into the quiet evening air. Behind me, the office stood tall, its lit windows housing a massive machine that ultimately runs on the everyday choices of the people we employ.